talking about species, guys, I wanted to say Happy Wine Wednesday. I hope you're having a fabulous week. I hope your seahorses and reef tanks and saltwater tanks galore are doing fabulously and that you are doing well too. I did a post on my, anyways, I did a post on my Instagram about mixing champagne, and I get the cheap kind, with watermelon. You guys, it is so freaking good. So now I had to have it on Wine Wednesday. As you can see, the watermelon soaks up the champagne, and the champagne gets little watermelon bits, and it's like a snack and treat and yummy all in one. So I definitely recommend it. I love it. It's my new drink. So had to say that. Also, new Mac coming next week, so we should have so much fewer problems on Wine Wednesday. I know I've said that before, and we haven't switched off of Zoom just because I haven't decided which one's best. But and we're so used to Zoom, you know. But we should be able to still use Zoom and have a better connection coming next week when I have the new MacBook Pro. I'm so excited. So stay tuned for that. If you do see them freeze, let me know, or if anything's wanky with the program, let me know, and we will for sure fix it. But happy Wine Wednesday to all of you. Welcome. Okay, so we have talked about mixing seahorse species before. But no question, I mean, when we get new questions about it and a different spin on it, I just think we should talk about it because that's what we like to do on Wine Wednesday is answer your questions. So we did have some specific questions about combs, but let's talk real quick, just in general, why you don't advise mixing seahorse species.
First of all, different species come from different parts of the world, and therefore they carry different pathogens that other species have never been exposed to. The one most common exception is keeping reidi and erectus. But we now know, because of the genetic DNA testing that's been done on them and the research that's been done on them, they do actually interbreed in the wild. There are hybrids that are born into the wild, and they also basically are coming from similar areas in and around the Gulf. Not so much with the northern erectus, which are on the eastern seaboard, but again, they also interbreed. And there's definite questions in terms of whether the northern and southern should be separate species. An example is we know that basically erectus are potential carriers for Vibrio, but they typically are resistant to it, as opposed to tiger tail seahorses, hippocampus combs, which we know from prior research and prior histopath on them that they are carriers of Uronema. And of course, a lot of this stuff can cross the ocean, but not in the pathogenic frequencies. So it's much more risky. Plus the fact.
Wait. Before you go on, I just want to say what you just said in a little bit simpler terms. So the question that we got was actually about h.kuda and combs. So I'm going to let Cheryl go on for sure because she is the brains here. But for someone like me that just doesn't really get all the scientific stuff, basically, so she said h.kuda are known to have uronema. So basically, they have this form of uronema that they can deal with. Like their systems, their immune systems, their bodies, they're just capable of living with it as long as it doesn't, as long as you don't have problems in the tank. And but when they're mixed with a species that's not immune to it, immune's not the right word, but not adapted to it, then they clash and one or both will die. And if that seahorse species is, able to live with a strain of Vibrio, whereas the h.kuda can't handle it at all, you put them in the same tank. And I do want to let you go on, Cheryl, but one of the main things that people don't get is they say, yeah, but we promote buying captive bred. So if I buy captive bred seahorses from the same breeder, different species, but from the same breeder, why is this still the case?
Well, first of all, just because they're captive bred does not mean they're still not carriers of different pathogens. First of all, they may be parasitic. It may be microbacterial. It just depends. The other thing you have to keep in mind is, like, I've kept combs since about 2000. Well, it started in 2007. They're typically are very slow, methodical feeders. They like to use the tip of their tail as a holdfast and hunt every hole in the rock looking for live food, even after they've eaten frozen. My erectus, I can dump a ton of food in there, twice as much as you would expect to feed say, any 4 or 5 combs, and it's going to be gone in 5 minutes. So their feeding behaviors, also their courtship behaviors are very different. Combs oftentimes, and to a lesser extent h.kuda, depending on where they're from, will typically, during the mating process, they typically will do an egg transfer while hitched, as opposed to erectus or reidi, which do it in the water column. So there's a lot of different variables within the different species. And this is where mixing, try putting a combs in with a erectus, feed them, and the combs is probably going to starve to death because it's not going to go racing after the food and gobble it all down like the erectus will.
Right.
So
So
there's a lot of different variables.
yep, and
Uh,
you hit on most of them. So basically, we don't, many species, as she's describing, have different behaviors. I think my response to the person that asked this question was, I kept Barbori, and as Cheryl describes the combs, that's how I describe Barbori. They were picky eaters. They had to have everything exactly how they wanted it. I always call them like prissy, kind of like the gotta have my way kind of seahorse. They were my favorite species, but I sure wouldn't put them with erectus because even when we talk about not mixing seahorses with fast, aggressive fish, that aren't seahorses, it's the same deal. The erectus, I believe, would eat all the food before the barbori even looked at a piece, right? So
yeah.
the behaviors, but yeah, and I think you did a great job, Cheryl, of explaining the fact that even the captive bred seahorses, we're talking about things that they're literally that they're genetically, because of the years they've spent in their portion of the ocean living with different pathogens, even though a breeder treats them and conditions them, and you as a customer will buy their offspring. You never, a breeder will never sell you the original pair, they'll sell you the offspring. So they're truly captive bred. We're not taking from the ocean, it's all a good thing, but the bottom line is those genetics are still passed down. So those seahorses, and
Well,
if the parents were a carrier, and who
yeah.
knows how each breeder does things, but if the parents are at all in contact with the fry, anyways, go ahead, Cheryl, you can expand off of
Well,
that.
I was going to say also, there's also a variety of different, besides the mating rituals. We know that erectus rise in the water column and complete an egg transfer well, it, basically in the water column. We also know they produce benthic fry, which are capable of eating larger food at birth.
Right.
Homes, on the other, they also typically deliver at first light. So you get up, you turn off the power,
Mm-hmm.
you turn on the lights, and you kick back and relax. Combs typically deliver sometime between midnight and 3 a.m., and they produce much smaller, tiny pelagic fry, as do h.kuda and a number of other species.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a difference in terms of trying to raise fry. What kind of a chance are newborn combs fry going to have in a system that's designed for erectus fry, which are about twice as big, and they're capable of eating baby brine shrimp, whereas with my combs and h.kuda also, and also engines are even worse than combs in terms of they need very tiny food, either preferably uh, newborn copepods as their first food. So there's a lot of different species differences that can have a negative impact.
And that's what's really interesting to me. I do understand what you explained, and I tried to explain this in the conversation with this person, but I do understand that like this really boils down to where they come from in the ocean, where they're originally from, and what their genetics or their immune systems can deal with. But what's interesting to me, I get that reedi and erectus overlap in their waters, and they actually breed in in the ocean, and so that's why we know and we've been able to keep them together and breed them, and have hybrid seahorses from those two species. But what you were just describing would seem to make that not Right. Do you know what I'm saying? Because you were just describing like reidi have the smaller fry that need the smaller foods, whereas erectus have the bigger fry that can start munching on artemia right away. So it's just interesting. I mean, who knows what it'll be? Well, we'll figure out in 20 years, right? But
Right. Well, it's like engines produce uh, can produce 1,000 plus fry, and I mean, quite. That's even when they're still young. Also, the males have a large bony plate directly below their coronet, and they actually use that as a battering ram on each other when the males are waging war to decide who is going to get the female. Well, can you imagine a 12-inch engines going after a 6-inch combs?
mm,
You'd probably kill it.
right. No,
So
makes
there's
sense.
just you've got to look at the behavioral differences, the medical differences, and differences in habitat. Combs are considered a reef-dwelling species. Uh, Erectus basically tend to hang out fairly close to shore in grass beds. So there's just a lot of individual differences.
So, what would you suggest if someone that just wants to keep seahorses, but um, and has heard this show and has heard the recommendation not to mix? But the original question that I was asked was, kind of on the side, tell me the truth. I understand you guys always recommend the best practices, but is it really, really real, or can I mix them? Is kind of how the question came to me. And what I tell you guys on this channel is what I would do in my own tanks. Like I've kept multiple species and I've kept them all different. And I love that Cheryl explained, the size difference. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Cheryl, what, or anyone, guys, I want to hear Ray and Holly's thoughts too. But what would you recommend if someone just maybe has kept erectus but just doesn't know much about other species? Obviously, you can Google where they come from, or you could ask the breeder that you're buying from because they will give you the absolute best advice based on their own seahorses. But should people look up where they're from, their size, all of it? What do you recommend when they're looking at
One,
species?
yeah. First of all, take a look at what part of the world they're coming from. Also,
Even
study
if
and
they're
do
coming from a breeder. Go ahead.
yeah,
Oh no.
that doesn't. They can still carry things that you would not anticipate. Look into what habitat they're in. There's species of seahorses in limbic straits and that's a tough world to live in, but they survive there. And I have never kept any, but I'm sure those are some really tough, hard-headed seahorses.
Which ones?
The limbic straits.
Oh wow. Yeah. Go ahead.
The other thing too is temperature. Northern
Okay.
erectus obviously have been found as far north as Nova Scotia. They've been found in blue northerns blow in laying on the substrate in Hudson Bay because they go torpid when it gets really cold. And basically they just lay down and go to sleep until it passes. Take from that, if you're looking at a species that's indigenous to parts of Asia, their normal temperature may be in the high 70s. So how are they going to adjust? Look at your pot-bellied seahorses. They're considered a colder water species. They need to be kept below, preferably at 65. We also found the same true with engines. They typically overall do better in a captive environment and much cooler water temperatures than most people keep their tanks. So
So let me
there's just
ask.
a
So
lot of
let me. Oh,
variables.
I'm sorry. So let me ask this. And Ray, you keep abdominalis, so I'm shooting this question at you real quick. Um, since engines are better off in cooler temperatures and abdominalis are better off in cooler temperatures, would you keep them together?
Not me personally, because I don't believe in mixing the species. And what I get the question quite often, and what I tell people is, you can go on ahead and mix them, but you have to suffer the consequences of that action, because sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't, and most times it's not going to. But I do tell them that if you do want to mix some species, get them from the same breeder, because the chances are that whatever they're breeding in their systems there. And they may even have some systems that are connected with a couple different species. And that's going to mean there's exposure to the pathogens of each other, and you're less likely to lose those seahorses. At least you won't lose them due to pathogen transfer anyway. That's about the best odds you can get.
Yep, absolutely.
There's
So,
too many different.
go ahead, Cheryl.
I mean, there's just too many differences between the species. It's like, would you want to put a wolf in the same cage with a coyote?
Right. That's a good
They're
example.
both canids. They're both canidae.
Yep.
What would
Perfect.
happen?
And welcome, Miss Heather. So glad you could jump in. How you doing?
Good. How's it going?
Good. We were
Thanks
talking
for
species.
letting me in.
Oh, whoops, sorry. We were talking
Oh,
species, and I do have one other Combs question, but then I think Heather's chilling in her sea shed, and everybody always has questions about that. So we'll keep
I am.
we'll chit chat with you in a minute. I did have one other question from Ocean Enthusiast, and Cheryl, I'm going to throw this one at you again because it's about Combs. I'm having trouble finding really super simple. He wants to. We covered basically already about mixing species, but he wants to know a little more information about Combs because he said he's getting varying information. For instance, um, um, do they like more flow in warmer waters because their habitat is in the wild is more reef-like? And are they fast or slow growers? Can you just give us a little overview on Combs?
They're slow growers compared to, say, erectus by far. They produce pelagic fry that are quite small, not as small as reedi, but still on the small side. They typically are found most often in basically a coral type of environment. My Combs, I did an experiment a few years back and put in a number of different types of soft.
I'm so sorry, guys. I hate when it starts. I'm thinking maybe I should jump out and in. That usually works. I don't know why this happens. It's going great and then it's not. Boo. Okay. She's not coming.
Literally. Yeah, they're a completely different world.
Okay, and it did freeze again. So did you said you did an experiment with soft coral and what happened then?
My Combs would not go near any of the corals.
Really? Wow.
So I had Euphilia, a variety of different softies in there. They never, ever once even dragged a tail across a coral. Whereas my erectus got themselves in trouble at one point when I had a zoo in there and they got stung. Several got stung by it, including me. And they ended up flopping around on the substrate for a few minutes and then swam off. So there's a